Okay, so we're gonna keep doing the file processing of numbers, and I want to go back to this example we just did. I said I was gonna compartmentalize this. I decided not to, mainly because we don't have a good way for a method to return multiple values right now. So, I would maybe put this all in a method called like process data or something, but then we would need from that, deposits and withdrawals and the balance. Or we could have that method call sort of output results, which would consist of these two lines of code. So it doesn't really make sense to take that out of main. We could, but what would make more sense is if we had a way to sort of return these three values, which we will when we have objects. So chapter 8 has objects. Really everything in Java is an object. These classes are instances of objects. So because we don't have that yet, we could also use arrays in chapter 7. So it's like a list, and we could use an array to return the doubles, 3 doubles. We'd have to maybe change the type on deposit and withdrawals to doubles, and then we could return all the doubles in a double array, or a list of doubles from that process input method. But right now we don't have those tools, so we'll just leave this one done for now, and we'll go on to the next example, which is very similar. I want to open the same file, numbers.txt, and I want to determine the total number of integers in the file, as well as determining the number of negative integers. So depending on what we were doing, if we also needed to keep track of the balance or keep track of the doubles, we might utilize the program we just wrote, but this one doesn't say any of that, so we'll just make a new program, new class. We'll call it process numbers 2. How about process integers? Because we're going to be looking only for the integers. No, I don't like that. Process numbers 2. Numbers is the data file we're dealing with, and we're really processing that data file. Okay. I think I might as well just type it back in. It won't take long. You could just copy and paste some of this if you wanted to, meaning not this part, but comments or the beginning part of the code is going to be the same. So program that opens a file of, let's say opens numbers.txt. And processes based on the integers. So there are both integers and doubles stored in the numbers.txt file. We want our code to determine the number of integers. So find the total number of integers and the number of negative integers. Again, we need the 2 import statements, IO, input output, and the utilities. Okay, and then in main, we'll throws file not found exception. I think trying to remember. I think in this quarter that's the only exception that we throw. But next quarter we have more that we might be throwing. My computer's on insert. Not good. Okay. So in main we need a scanner and a file. So I'll do them together now. Scanner input equals new scanner, and then in here I'm going to go new file, and then we'll just put the name of the file here, numbers.txt. I think that's going to work. Yep. So that's going to, so the weird thing there is you have the new file syntax in here, and then it opens the file, and then it assigns the scanner to read from that file. Okay, so what are we doing? We're going to count how many integers. So we need a variable like called integer count. So integer count. You know, if we were only counting integers, we could just say it was just count. But I'm going to count both integers and negative integers. So integer count's not a bad name for it. So last time we looped through and we said, you know, while it has next double, then we can keep going. I think we want to do the same thing again, because you might think, oh, while it has another integer, read, you know, while it's not an integer, read the next value in, and then look for the next integer. The problem with that is, we want to make sure that we don't read past the end of the file. So I think our while loop, we want to keep it the same. While input.hasNext, we could just say has next, or we could say has next double, because everything in there is at least a double. So no, this is a little bit interesting. So how do we, maybe we go back to our pseudocode. How do we determine if it's an integer or a double? So, you know, can I, in my while loop, while, if I say while it has another integer, this isn't going to work, because if we look at our data, it may not have another integer. So the idea there would be, while it has another integer, while it's not an integer, read it in and toss it. And then you'd keep running that loop while it's not an integer. Well, the problem with that is then we're going to try to be reading at the end when there is nothing left. So I think because everything in the list is doubles, we need to, similar to the last example, continue the loop while there is still more data. So while the input has next or has next double would work. In other words, keep looking as long as there's something left. And what are we going to do? So here we're going to need to read this guy in. So it's going to get to the next data value. Suppose it's 39.2, and the next one after that is 45. So does it have another double? Yes. I don't really want to count that because it's not an integer. So I need to sort of say, well, if it is an integer, count it. So I can say if input.has next int, and now I can increase my count by 1, and I can read that integer in. So get rid of it. Increase the count and get rid of it. And then it'll go back up and it says, well, does it have another double? So right now it'll come in here. Does it have another double? Yes. If that's an integer, it's not. So it's going to skip this code. It's going to skip that code. So I guess this statement should not be in the if statement at all. if it has another integer, increase the count. Either way, nope, that's not right. We don't need to do next int here. We can just do next or next double, because we're going to have to get rid of that thing that's next, regardless of whether it's an integer or not. So next double would work. So let's see. While it has next double, so 39.2 that has another double. If it's an integer, it's not. Skips down here, it says, okay, read that in. Go back to the while loop. While it has another double, it does. If it's an integer, it is. Increase the count. So we would have 1, and then read it in. While it has another double, there's nothing left, it would stop. So this should work. Notice what I did there is I kind of wrote it out with a couple examples. I mean, maybe I should try another integer or try a couple doubles in the front, but we're going to try it and see if it works. So what are we going to try? While it has another double, and then if input dot has next int, if that next thing is an integer, you know, I'm not crazy about this integer count. I don't think I should use the keyword integer as part of my variable. Let's just call it count for now. Let's increase the count by 1. So I don't want to use int as the precursor to count. I could use integer count, spell the whole thing out, or just use count. And then when we go to negative count, I'll add negative in front of it. Okay, so if the input has another integer, increase the count. Either way, you can just do an input dot next here. So that's going to clear out whatever that was that we just counted. And then let's just print that out and see. It should be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Seven. So go back and make sure that's right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, 7. Okay, so that's working. So maybe we add in here. There are a total, well, number. How about we do it like this? Number of integers. Yeah, I didn't use a printf, so it's harder to print it out. Number of integers 7. And now we want to modify it to figure out how many negative integers there are. So right here where we're increasing this count, we want to check on what that whether that integer is positive or negative. But if we want to check that integer, we have to read it in first. So that's going to change this guy here, because I don't want to read it in and then read the next thing in as well. So let's get rid of that line of code. If it has another integer, I want to increase my count. I want to read that integer into something. So let's go temp, integer temp. And again, why is it temporary? Because it's going to get replaced each time it goes into this loop or into this if statement. Integer temp equals input dot next integer. I know that's an integer if I'm in this. And then I can say if temp is less than 0, I want to increase the negative count, which I haven't defined yet, so I'm going to get an error there. So back up where we defined count, let's go comma, negative count also equals 0. So they're both integers, counting how many something there is. So this is almost going to work. Right now, if it's not an integer, we're never advancing the scanner. So let's see, outside this, not that little loop, but this if statement here, outside of that, so last time I just had input.next here. The problem with this now is that when it is an integer, we're going to already have read it in. So we only want this to read in if that thing was not an integer. So what we need to do is put it in an else statement. Else input.next. So if it has an integer, increase the count. If that, read that integer in. If that integer is less than 0, increase the negative count. Else, so else is referring to it's not an integer, so we ignore all of that code. And then we say, okay, else, we still need to read that in and get rid of it. So that's what that's doing. Now, if I needed to do what I did in the last problem, keep a balance or whatever, then we'd have to appropriately update these to the balance each time. We're not doing that here, so it doesn't matter. And I will copy this print statement and say the number of negative integers, and now we'll add to that negative count. And the first part should still stay at 7. And the second part should give me apparently 3, but we might want to go back and check the data. There's a negative integer, there's a negative integer, and there's a negative integer. Yep, 3. So then, you know, if we wanted to find out how many positive integers there were, well, we know there's 3 negatives, so there must be 4 positives. I guess in the last problem, the last project, I did the same thing. Oh, and the last one, I didn't count the total, so I did need to keep track of withdrawals and deposits. In this example, if I was keeping track of negative and positive integers, because I have a total count, that's all the integers, and a negative count, the positive integers would just be count minus negative count. So let's go ahead and put that in just for fun. Number of positive integers, just to show you that we don't have to do any additional coding. We've already done the processing that we needed. What we would need to add to this would be count minus negative count. Now, there's a sort of a asterisk here because it's not just counting the positive integers. It doesn't like that. We need to put that in parentheses to say do that subtraction first and then add that on as a string. That's the precedence, the order of operations is trying to add. It would first add the count to this string, making it a string, and then try to subtract a number from a string. You can't do it. You can add a number to a string, but you can't subtract from a string. And there we go. 7 total, 3 positive, or 3 withdrawals, 4 deposits. Good. So that's it for this video. Nice, a little shorter. And I will try to get all that code on screen in case you want to pause. Just go big. And then you can pause it. I like to clean up white space here. It's not needed. There you go.